Thank you so much for the Manu for the warm welcome. And thanks much more to Father Jose for initiating this second series of lectures, searching for ways to live better Christian lives in this COVID and post-COVID times. I feel blessed to be addressing you all and engaging in a dialogue of how, in Ignatian terms, we ask, what more can I do for Christ and his people? In my presentation, I would like to re-look at the prophetic call of every Christian. Look at the current context of India and the world and search for ways to live as prophets in our own simple and unassuming ways. The image I want to begin with is that of Jesus. His cleansing of the temple. The first and last time you see Jesus angry in his life. Matthew 21, 12, 13 says, Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, it's written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers. That is indeed pretty strong language and got Jesus into trouble. The Jewish leaders were indignant. Every Christian is called to be a prophet. Prophecy in the New Testament is seen as both as a continuation of the prophecy in the Old Testament as well as a fulfillment. For the New Testament authors, the correct interpretation of Old Testament prophecy is that it speaks in toto of Jesus Christ. In the New Testament, Jesus is presented as the prophet that was promised in Deuteronomy. Jesus himself regarded as a prophet, and so did some of his contemporaries. One aspect of this prophetic image, however, is missing in Jesus. That is what he called an ecstatic dimension. Although supernatural revelations are found in connection with him, example, the transformation of Jesus as witnessed by some of his disciples at Mount Tabor, or as a prophet, Jesus predicted his own death, his return as the Son of Man at the end of the world, and the destruction of Jerusalem temple. At many points in New Testament writings, Jesus is compared with and interpreted through the classical prophets, and his death is seen as martyrdom of a prophet, his sufferings, and even in his identity. It is not in my brief to go on to an elaborate discussion on who is a prophet, nor is there time for such a thing in this brief presentation. I want to begin this way. The primary role of a prophet is to listen to God and speak the truth, just as Jesus did, or as Moses did to Pharaoh. He said to Pharaoh, let my people go. So this is the primary role of a Christian too. Listen to our God and speak the truth. In plain language, call out, the emperor is naked. Of course, the manifesto of Jesus' mission will remain a powerful call to be a prophet as a Christian. Luke 4:18 says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. Is there anything in the corona pandemic affected world, especially in India, which calls Christians to be prophets? In answering this question, let's look at the impact of the pandemic and then see whether we need to play the prophetic role. I want to quote two people. One is Ramchandra Guha, whom some of you may have read, an eminent historian and social critic who wrote recently in one of his columns. He says there are 6 crises that the coronavirus pandemic has brought in. One, especially in India, a medical crisis. There is an economic crisis. There's a humanitarian crisis, as we have witnessed on the roads of India all through these days. There's a psychological crisis. There is a weakening of Indian federalism. Now, as a believer and as a Christian, I would add to this list a crisis of faith, a crisis of religion. Now, which is the concern of all of us as religious and as believers? I take his summarization of Ram Guha. He says, the Indian medical system is overburdened. The Indian economy is in shambles. Indian society is divided and fragile. Indian federalism is weaker than before. The Indian state is becoming increasingly authoritarian. It is the combination of all these factors that makes this perhaps the greatest crisis in the country has faced since partition. This may very well be the greatest challenge in the history of the Republic. We shall need all our wisdom, all our resources, and all our compassion to overcome it. I repeat that sentence. We shall need all our wisdom, all our resources, and all our compassion to overcome it. In another insightful lecture by one Prem Chandavarkar, he summarizes the 7 lessons for the future for the world after the COVID-19 pandemic. And first lesson, he says that markets cannot be the primary backbone. Markets have conquered the world, and the number one lesson is markets cannot be the primary backbone. The second lesson, he says, is we need an inclusive politics of recognition, precariat, neglected. By the way, for those who are unfamiliar with the word precariat, it's a term that arose in the 80s to describe those whose employment and incomes are insecure, who are dependent on daily earnings for their basic sustenance, who are not granted secure access to food, healthcare, and education, and who are exposed to the greatest hardship when the economy slows down. Under neoliberalism, the precariat has been forming a larger and larger percent of the population, especially in recent years. Their condition gets heightened in conditions like a pandemic, when their tales of hardship become visible as their collective volume becomes difficult to ignore. And a third lesson, local government is the core. A fourth lesson, our relationship with nature must be harmonious. A fifth lesson, local business must be the foundation of economic policy. A sixth lesson, in relationships, quantity time is quality time. And finally, the seventh lesson, the priorities in our lives must begin within us. And for us believers and religious, that seventh lesson is very important. The priorities in our lives must begin within us. If we wish to form a society that's resilient and just and fulfilling, the search must begin within, reminds Mr. Prema. Now, what these two presentations and a host of other narratives that are being shared around say very clearly, we cannot go on doing our business as usual. I want to now look concretely what's happening around the world, especially in India, and see whether the insights that are emerging from the two articles I referred to are being followed. Most importantly, whether, as Mr. Ram Guha argued, are we using all our wisdom, all our resources, and all our compassion to overcome the crisis? I would like to highlight on 3 aspects. What's happening around? The first thing that all of us know, and Father Jose already in his introduction mentioned that, utter callousness towards the poor. In India, whether it is in the announcement of the shutdown or the travel arrangements for the stranded or the economic packages or the continued treatment of the crisis, the ruling dispensation has shown absolute disregard for the poor. In fact, it looks like the poor do not exist for them. There's an old axiom: be counted to count. Or put it obviously, if you are not counted, you will not count. Till today, nobody knows exactly how many are poor, how many are starving, how many are malnourished, etc. Do you know that the present dispensation has either stopped counting them, or even if they have counted, they refuse to give the numbers out? Why? Do the poor not count? I quote John Dressey. He says, and I quote, the lockdown has been like a death sentence for the underprivileged. Yes, a death sentence indeed. You'd have already heard from the migrants. We prefer to die of the virus rather than die of hunger. He continues, the policies made to contain the pandemic have been made or influenced by a class of people who pay little or no attention to the consequences for the back into poverty. Those who over the years had come to above the poverty line. 40 million of them would fall into abject poverty. And Nikhil Day, in one of his recent talks, remarked, and I quote, migrant workers dismissed by employers, enjoying no protection from their governments, often thrown out of their accommodation by their landlords in urgent need of food, transport, and money, driven out by the dispensation to walk home. We're not thinking of them as human beings, unquote. One question should baffle us all. A country that has sent men to the outer space, that claims to be growing into a $1 trillion economy, can't the country not transport the migrant workers to their homes? Can't they put food and cash into their hands? These are questions the posterity will ask us also. These are questions we all will be answerable for. I know what will be the retort of the supporters of the ruling dispensation. They will ask, how can you say that the government is callous towards the poor when we have spent so much and are spending? And they will list the number of projects. They will quote huge amounts, and we will be thoroughly confused. More than ever, we need prophets who can call the bluff a bluff. A second dimension I want to bring to attention is fiddling with labor laws that have been happening around. It would be interesting to note what the governments across the country have done to the labor laws. Aimed at boosting the economy amidst the ongoing COVID-19 pandemics, several states in India have recently come out with ordinances and notifications containing exemptions from compliance with certain labor laws. And such suspension has been sought to give more flexibility to business and employers in order to help curb the effects of the COVID-19 mandated lockdown. Labor laws, by the way, provide social security measures for workers, and while these measures may help boost the economy, they have also raised concerns regarding the protection of the rights of the Indian labor force. The states that have already passed ordinances are Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Himachal Pradesh. And remember, if India must remain a democracy, workers and those who speak on their behalf must be heard while framing or changing regulations. Their voices must not be silenced by ordinances, but who cares? The third dimension I want to highlight is what is happening to democracy. And I want to quote a recent study by Videm Institute, Department of Political Sciences at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, which reported that for the first time in this millennium, autocracies outnumber democracies across the world. And India has continued on a path of steep decline to the extent that it has almost lost its status as a democracy. The United States, former vanguard of liberal democracy, has lost its way. The other countries are following up. Today, in the world, 92 countries are autocratic. India is put in the league of top autocratizing countries. Why is India put in the list? India is on the verge of losing its status as a democracy due to the severely shrinking space for the media, civil society, and the opposition under the present government. Of course, India's official position on such reports has usually been to ignore them with no response or dismiss them, resting on the laurels of electoral democracy and being home to the world's largest elections. Dr. Raghuram Rajan spoke recently, and I quote him, "I do believe decentralization is important both for bringing more local information to work and for giving empowerment to the people. But what you see across the world is a greater sense of disempowerment. The central authoritarian model, the strong figure in a world where you are powerless, is sometimes appealing, especially if you can develop a personal rapport with that figure," unquote. In the context of these three concrete issues and the general issues all of us are aware of, I hear a concrete call to the prophecy, and the three concrete ways of the call, I would like to think of three concrete ways of being prophetic in the context that I referred to above, and they are to be a good Samaritan, to be good Samaritans, watchdogs, and whistleblowers. Be a good Samaritan. We know this pandemic has brought out the best of human beings and the worst of human beings. The amount of food distribution, accompaniment, and advocacy that is happening in the country and across the world is marvelous. It is as though the evil of coronavirus pandemic has brought the best of humans. There are thousands and thousands of images. Pope Francis, older and frailer, but alert and eager, walking the streets of Rome alone, praying, is an image which will remain with us. In India, thousands of volunteers across the country gave food and water to the poor. So many are still actively advocating for the causes of the poor. Many are still searching for answers. Another image, a popular image, was of film actors like Hrithik Roshan and companions reportedly helped 40,000 migrant laborers. Now we should remember, there is a difference between a random act of charity and being a good Samaritan. In the Bible story, the Good Samaritan did not just do some charity and walk away. He promised to come back and ensure that the victim is back on his feet. Here is the challenge. Can we move from the random, quick acts of charity to sustained accompaniment of the poor? Or, as another actor said, donate, but don't take a camera along. Donate, but don't take a camera along. Can we Christians, along with all men and women of goodwill, ensure that we will accompany the poor till they are self-reliant? That is the job of a prophet today. Second, being a watchdog. A watchdog is a person or organization responsible for making certain agencies obey particular standards and do not act illegally. To be a prophet in India or elsewhere is to be a watchdog today. Someone who can tell the truth in simple and understandable ways. Let me give you a concrete example. When the government of India announced a huge amount of rupees 20 lakh crores as stimulus package, there were two distinctively opposite narratives. The official one claimed that this is one among the largest and the best in the world. The opponents said it's an eyewash. One of the cartoons showed the finance minister murmuring to the ears of the prime minister and said, "Sir, can I add one more zero to it?" Now, the opponents kept on saying there's hardly anything in it for the poor and the marginalized. Now, here is where we need a watchdog who is unbiased or rather biased on the side of the poor and the marginalized, telling us, the ordinary people, what the truth is. A watchdog can continuously alert the people on what is done, what is not done for those who need. To be a prophet today is to be a watchdog. And a third dimension of being prophet today is to be a whistleblower. A whistleblower is a person who informs one on a person or an organization regarded as engaging in an unlawful or immoral activities like corruption, fraud, etc. Unfortunately, we live in a context where whistleblowers are exterminated. In spite of legal machineries like Whistleblowers Protection Act 2011, just look at the number of whistleblowers who have just disappeared, just died, or just not seen at all. Just for example, would anyone remember Satyendra Dubey, the Indian Engineering Service officer, who was murdered for all that we know because he called out the corruption in the construction projects? Most people have even forgotten Satyendra Dubey. There are 100 of others like him in the line, known and unknown. There are those who are in jails for false cases concocted to silence them. My dear friends, fear rules the world now. Words like sedition and anti-national are used freely. We need whistleblowers all around. To be a prophet today is to be a whistleblower. I must add a statutory warning here. To be a prophet today is definitely to risk martyrdom. Martyrdom not necessarily in instant death. It could be harassment, constant transfers, inquiries after inquiries, investigating officers at your door every day, criticism from your own people, incarceration, and many, many others. And death, physical death, and torture, will remain a real possibility. In spite of this, think of the ordinary people who have opted to be whistleblowers and opted for martyrdom. I want to remember two women martyrs in India today. Those two inspire me and challenge me along many, many others. Sister Rani Maria, now beatified. She died fighting money lenders. Sister Valsa was brutally murdered because she was a threat to illegal mining. Yes, my dear friends, being a prophet is to be ready for martyrdom. Along with the call to prophethood is a call to credibility. To be a prophet, there's no doubt one has to be absolutely credible. One of the biggest crises of leadership across the world is the loss of credibility. The leaders don't practice what they preach. The post-truth society makes the crisis subtler. Social media and the virtual buying up of the conventional media by the corporates and the ruling class has made the issues of credibility really complex. We really do not know what to believe. Even to get a simple fact clear, you are in a position to, you have to refer to at least 2 or 3 sources. The fact is that everyone still longs for credible leaders. I want to add a postscript. I would like to criticize the leader of my nation for calling for self-reliance of people, himself wearing clothes costing lakhs of rupees and branded glasses and watches, until I look around and see where I am, in the cozy comfort zone of a religious house. And yet, next slide please, and yet the call beckons everyone. Be credible prophets in the time of the pandemic. Thank you.